Hello, welcome to CRPS Contender, my complex regional pain syndrome education channel. Today's video is Devoured by Your Defense, Neuroautoimmunity Symptoms. This video is part of my Mind is Matter mega series, so if you would like to watch these in any particular order, here is the listicle for you. Now, this particular video is part 2 of Nomming on Neurons, so if for some reason this isn't making sense to you, you might go back and watch that one first. Let's hop into the content here. Before we get into the specifics, I want to do a quick refresher on the difference between autoimmunity and inflammation in the brain, because they're enacted by the same cells. Neuroautoimmunity is the specific response to particular aspects of the brain, specific receptors, which I'm going to discuss in this video. The inflammation is the general response of pressure and how that affects the brain, which is caused by the autoimmunity response, but is less targeted and is instead more like collateral damage. So, you have 3 major types of neuronal receptors that are targeted in neuroautoimmunity in CRPS. This means you are producing autoantibodies against them, and they are considered autoantigens, which means your body sees them as not you, and that they need to be destroyed because they are problematic. So, there's 3 of them. Let's talk about them. The first one is the alpha-1A adrenergic receptor. What does it do when it is functioning properly? One thing that it does is it affects smooth muscle. It is involved in the vasoconstriction of blood vessels in your skin, sphincters, GI tract, renal artery, which is in your kidneys, and in your brain. During sympathetic nervous system activity, blood flow decreases to these areas, causing impaling. These receptors can also induce minor bladder contractions, contractions in the ureters and the uterus during pregnancies, urethral sphincter, the bronchioles in your lungs, which is just a minor response, your iris dilator muscle to open your pupil, make more light come in so that you can see more, and your seminal tract, which is responsible for ejaculation. This also has effects in the brain, which produces anorexia. Now, this is not the same thing as anorexia nervosa, which usually has more to do with body dysmorphia and wanting to have control. This just means having a lack of appetite, which looks the same in practice, but psychologically has very different roots. When your A1A adrenergic receptor is functioning properly, it also decreases the cellular excitability in all layers of the temporal cortex, including your primary auditory cortex. It also decreases glutamatergic excitatory postsynaptic potentials, which means it's inhibiting glutamate. And it also increases the inhibition of your olfactory system. If these receptors are being targeted, which means they're being destroyed, so they cannot be activated, that means your glutamate is able to be more active, which can cause neuroexcitotoxicity, which basically means the cells get so excited that they die or damage themselves. Also, might develop a very strong aversion to particular scents because your olfactory system, which is your smell system, is not being suppressed. Okay, what other areas can this affect? It can both weaken and strengthen the force of the contraction of your cardiac muscle. It can increase salivary gland secretions and the potassium levels in your saliva. It is responsible for glycogen breakdown and glucose production. It increases sweat gland secretions, increases sodium reabsorption in the kidneys, stimulates the proximal tubule in the kidneys, activates cell division response and regulates the growth and proliferation of many different kinds of cells. It is involved in the detection of mechanical feedback on the hypoglossal motor neurons, hypoglossal, that's under tongue, which allow for the long-term facilitation of respiration in response to a repeated cessation of breath, which would be apnea. And vasoconstriction with this receptor only occurs in 2 settings: at rest or during very heavy exercise. This does not happen during moderate activity. I want to remind you, this is talking about the proper function. This is not talking about what happens when it is dysfunctional. Okay? So let's talk about the next one. The beta-2 adrenergic receptor. This acts in 5 major areas. Let's talk about the muscular area first. This inhibits digestion, facilitates respiration, inhibits urination, inhibits uterine labor, facilitates striated muscle contractions and motility. Striated muscle, that's your somatic muscles, the ones you actively control. It increases vasodilation and perfusion, how much blood gets through, how big your blood vessels are. It increases striated muscle mass and contraction speed. It also works in your digestive system, encouraging glycogen breakdown and glucose production, sphincter contraction, thickened salivary secretions, insulin secretion, glucagon secretion, and lactate release. In your eyes, it increases your intraocular pressure. In your circulatory system, it is involved in your heart muscle contraction, an increase in cardiac output, an increase in your heart rate via your SA node, an increase in atrial cardiac muscle contractility, an increase in the contractility and automaticity of your ventricular cardiac muscle. It dilates the hepatic artery, which is the liver, and it dilates skeletal muscle arterioles. And then, in the other section, it inhibits histamine release in mast cells, increases protein content in lacrimal secretions. It is involved in bronchial dilation in your lungs. It is involved in brain immune communications, and is present in the cerebellum. Again, this is what happens when these receptors are functioning properly. Alright, and the last one we're going to discuss here is the muscarinic 2 receptor. It is involved in 4 major areas. Let's talk about the heart. This receptor is responsible for slowing the heart rate after stimulation by the parasympathetic nervous system, slowing depolarization. It reduces the contractive force of the arterial cardiac muscle. It reduces the conductivity of the AV node, which occurs almost exclusively with your M2 receptors. M2 is highly expressed in the heart and has a profound role in muscle cell contraction of the heart muscle. Endothelium. In the endothelium, the M2 receptor is responsible for releasing nitric oxide, which leads to smooth muscle relaxation and produces profound vasodilation. In your central nervous system, it is found in limited distribution and at much lower levels than in cardiac tissue, but is mainly expressed in your thermoregulatory centers of the hypothalamus and is likely involved in the regulation of body temperature. And lastly, smooth muscle. The smooth muscle M2 is co-expressed with M3, and it plays a much smaller role in smooth muscle contractile responses. Again, this is what is happening when the M2 is properly functioning. Thanks so much for watching. If you like the content I'm producing on this channel, hit subscribe. You're welcome to share anything I produce on this channel. If you would like to contribute to my Patreon, it is listed below. As always, relevant sources will be linked in the description. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time. Hello.